The first question I have for both of you is you've both founded several companies. I'm wondering if you could talk about like the light bulb or catalyst moment. What was the point in time where you saw a problem or a market opportunity and, you made the leap of faith and said, I'm going to be the one to go solve that problem, create a company. And really, yeah, what is that light bulb catalyst moment? I'll start with Sean.
Yeah,
Fair
there
enough.
we go. Okay. So it was a little different in each of the 3 startups that I started. And honestly, I think when I think about, I probably invested in 20 startups over the last 10 years. I think the founder stories have all been a little different. But I think one thing that is similar across them, Max, is it tends to be less of a light bulb moment and more of a sort of evolution, if you will, where eventually you get to a point where you can't imagine doing anything other than starting that business. So, I think entrepreneurs, my definition of entrepreneurs is people who look out into the world, see things in the world that aren't the way they should be, and build products and services that make the world that way. And I think what happened in most of my experiences, and also with a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've invested in, is they end up seeing that, trying to convince the world to catch up with them, and eventually when they can't imagine anything other than that, they jump in and start the business that allows them to sort of realize that vision and then ultimately realize economic value through it.
Thank you, Paul. Same question.
Yeah, I think it'd be similar. I can't say there was like a single moment, right? It was a build up over time. And yeah, the toughest decision for any entrepreneur, especially the first time entrepreneur, is that leap of faith from the comfort of a job and that security, and taking the leap to say, am I willing to bet my future on an idea that might be a little early. And so, the startup that I did about 7 years ago, we were probably 2-3 years ahead of the rest of the market. And so being able to have that conviction to say, I do see this, I'm going to stick to this path. And I believe that this is going to solve a problem that may not be so prominent today, but will become a problem in the future is the hardest part, because you go through a lot of the emotional tolls of the ups and downs of, am I doing this? Am I doing this the right way? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right idea? And you're constantly evaluating that, and you're dealing with that internal dialogue. But for me, it was one of those things where I sat there one day and I said, you know what? I always knew I wanted to be my own boss, and I didn't want to work for someone else. I'm terrible working for other people. I'm sure all my previous managers will tell you I was a complete pain in the ass, and they'd never want to hire me back again. But I think that's where I knew at that moment. I saw, I could create a whole new market and be a pioneer, and you're not going to get very many of those chances. I do see a lot of other entrepreneurs who are fast follow, and they'll copy someone else and they'll do it better than someone else. But the opportunity to be unique and pioneer and be almost like the godfather of a market it was a pretty compelling opportunity. And my wife told me I was a complete idiot for leaving my partnership at a consulting firm that was a very comfortable job and putting, at the time, 4 kids at risk. But, it all worked out in the end. And I told her the day we got acquired, I said, I told you so, right? That was probably my greatest moment, was telling her I told you so.
Very nice. We're gonna ask about your highlights and greatest moments later. So I do want to ask, once you've decided to start your company, right? What are those really tactical first steps that, if you're a first-time founder, maybe you're not thinking about? What are the first sort of milestones, major early wins that you're trying to accomplish once you've established your company? Paul, I'm going to start with you this time.
Sure. I'm actually going through that right now. I mean, literally finishing the incorporation of my next startup. We're actually bootstrapping ourselves. My co-founder is also exited to the same company. We both exited to FireEye. I ran the product business at FireEye, and he ran engineering. So we decided to join forces. But the thing that we've been working on for the last couple of weeks, and it's challenging in the world of COVID because I'm a very personal type of guy. I like to go out. I like to meet my clients. I like to, spend time with them, really get to know them. And it's been a pivot to be able to adapt to this new virtual world of trying to identify the customer problems and really getting a good feel for the signal through the noise of all the things that are happening out there, especially in the cybersecurity market. It's super noisy now, right? I mean, it's a very hot market. There's a lot of capital in there in the market that you can pretty much go raise tomorrow. We've had a lot of interest. There's a lot of startups that are probably more feature companies than they are product companies, yada, yada, yada. So in a market like this, it does help where, we're not first time founders anymore. We've at least got the feel of the market. And where I sat, I ran a global business. So the product business I ran was, $750 million annual revenue business for FireEye on a global scale. So my market research was really sitting in that role, playing both a business owner role, running the business day to day, but also with our corporate development function, which if you're in a large corporate environment, corporate development is right hand for M&A activities and helping me research the market. And so, just getting in tune with the market, you have to really make sure that the problem that you're solving for is a problem that does exist, right? You can't necessarily manifest one that doesn't exist. And the other is quickly identifying the value that you can deliver. And it doesn't have to be big. I think some people get pretty big in terms of this visionary, like I can go solve this big problem, but it actually starts with solving, a little bit of value, testing it and iterating through that process versus this grand scheme of I can go conquer the world. You can have that vision, but at the same time, like you have to get those small wins at the beginning of building on those incremental pieces of value as you progress through that journey with the customer. So that's where we are right now. We've probably done close to 100 customer conversations in the last month alone. Just all day, right? Taking notes, getting the pattern in terms of what issues they're dealing with, the segmentation of which markets are really dealing with that issue. It's funny because I'm focused on the cloud security market right now. Typically in the past, financial services and government were the leading edge in terms of adoption of technology. That's actually been inverted from a cloud standpoint. Those are actually the trailers in terms of adoption of cloud. So now you're looking at more tech companies and my co-founders in Palo Alto. So, the segmentation exercise is a little bit different this time around. But you just got to really start to tune in on right value, right problem statement in the right markets. And you got to get that as quickly as you possibly can. And then that's the time to go grow and talk to folks like Sean, right? Raise the seed stage and really know what you're doing at that point.
Thank you, Sean. I'll ask a similar question. Early milestones you're looking at in a startup that you're interested in funding or who's interested in venture?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So I would say, first of all, I think one question an entrepreneur should ask themselves as it relates to raising venture is, do you actually have a business that should raise venture? A lot of businesses should not raise venture capital, right? And really, you only want to raise venture capital if it's the only option to build the business that you have in mind, right? So what I mean by that is, if you think about the trade you're making when you raise venture, you're giving away part of your business that you as the entrepreneur believe is worth hundreds of millions or even maybe billions of dollars for hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of dollars, right? So that's a terrible trade if there's other ways to build that really valuable business. Now, for a lot of businesses, they need to lose money for a period of time before they can make a lot of money. And so the only way to get from here to there is raising money because, 100% of nothing is a lot less valuable than 70% or 50% or 30% of a big number, right? So sometimes you have to make that trade. But I think a first question to ask yourself is, do you want to make that trade? And then if you do, right, if you have that kind of business that needs to lose money for some amount of time and you don't have other ways to provide that capital, then you should absolutely talk to investors, right? So Paul talked about he and his co-founder are bootstrapping the business, right? They're basically saying, yeah, we know our business needs to lose money for a period of time, but we can provide much more inexpensive capital from our personal balance sheets than from an investor like me. And I think that's a totally rational thing to do. once you though are in that universe where it's like, okay, yeah, I should talk to an investor, I think it becomes a bit driven on based on what type of stage that startup is, right? So at the early stage where we're investing, we're really trying to assess is a lot of the things Paul was talking about and what's often called in the market today product market fit, right? Do you serve a group of customers who are a good market, right? And do you solve a real problem for them that's meaningful enough that you can build a viable business? If the answer to those questions are yes, then you can have lots of conversations about, okay, what have you done with the limited amount of capital you've spent so far? What can you do with the amount of capital that you're looking to raise here to make your business much more valuable, right? But I think that at the early stage, that's what you're trying to assess. As you move to these later stage financings, maybe raising 10, 20, $50 million, then what you're trying to do is a very different conversation. It's more like, I've got this machinery where if I put $1 in the top of this machine, a lot more than $1 comes out the bottom. And you're basically trying to prove to them that that machinery is robust, scalable, not brittle, makes a ton of sense. And if that's where you are, then you're talking about a very different type of financing. But across that whole stack, I think in general, it's really great that entrepreneurship is a lot more popular than it was 20 years ago. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. But I mean, I remember when I left Carnegie Mellon to be an entrepreneur, most of my friends thought that was because I couldn't get a job in banking or consulting, right? Today, there's lots of people taking these entrepreneurial jobs. It's much more popular. I think one downside to it, though, is that we've glamorized the fundraising process, right? And the fundraising process is a necessary evil. That's being said as someone who spends a large part of my day every day writing the checks. It's a necessary evil. Now, if it's actually necessary, right, if there's no other way to do it, awesome. But if there are other ways to grow your business other than working with people like me, you absolutely should do it. We're slow moving. We exercise a lot of control, and we take a lot of money. We take a lot of your business in return for the capital we're providing. And so you should only make that trade if it's like, okay, this is the only way I get from here to there.
But moving on, I do want to ask maybe a more personal question. Well, maybe what was your lowest moment or biggest mistakes? Or biggest mistake? We don't have to go into all of them, but in your entrepreneurial journey, and how do you overcome them? This is starting a business is obviously something that many people fail at. How do you bounce back up from those? Maybe you can talk a little bit to your own experience. Sean, I'll start with you for this one.
Sure. I mean, I feel like a fair question is how much time do you have for my mistakes? But I'll focus on one particularly low moment. So after we sold our first business to Morgan Stanley, we took a lot of the same technology to do content recommendations instead of stock recommendations. And we built a product called Feed Hub, which was basically going to deliver personalized content to people based on the RSS feeds they were subscribed to. And long story short, we spent about 10 months building that product, launched it at a large tech conference, and ultimately, shortly after we launched it, realized that we had solved the wrong problem for the wrong market, right? So we had spent myself and 9 other people's time for 10 months building a product that nobody wanted. And it was pretty depressing because it was 10 wasted months of my life, and it was 10 wasted months of 9 other people's lives. And what I realized, long story short, is that there are a lot of other ways that I could have figured that out a lot faster than wasting 100-person months of time. And so, when I think about, and ultimately there wasn't the term pivot back then. Eric hadn't written Lean Startup at that point, but ultimately we pivoted the business, changed leveraged the technology in some interesting ways, sold that to LinkedIn. It was an okay outcome, but it was a brutal kind of rationalization to learn that we had wasted basically a year of our lives. And what I'm trying to do now when I spend time at Carnegie Mellon teaching entrepreneurs, or when I'm making investments or whatever, is I'm trying to help those students, those entrepreneurs, make different mistakes. right? That was a terrible mistake. And I think there's things you can do to avoid making that mistake. And to your point, Max, like entrepreneurs are going to make mistakes. It's a hard problem where you don't quite know the problem and you don't quite know the solution when you begin that journey. And, you know, on the early days, it's going to involve hundreds of conversations with potential customers, like Paul was just talking about doing with his business right now. But if you don't do that hard work, you end up wasting a lot more time later building something that nobody wants. And certainly as I look across my career and think about what was the most challenging time for me, it was that. It was ultimately realizing that I had wasted so much of my time and so many other folks' time building something that nobody really wanted.
Thanks, Sean. Paul, same question, low moment and, you know, what you learned from it or how you bounce back.
Yeah, I will tell you the journey, and Sean can attest to this, right, is not an easy one. It's probably the biggest emotional roller coaster. So you have a lot of highs, you have a lot of lows. And, you know, one of the things that I remember so clearly was during the acquisition process for my company, I had built this whole culture, right? I was very big on culture, and like trust and transparency was big for me because I had spent some time in big four consulting shops, which, you know, in my opinion, that doesn't necessarily breed a lot of trust per se. You know, you probably sell your grandmother down the river to make partner at some point, and you don't care who you stepped on along the way, which is not really what I wanted to do. And my philosophy was, why waste your energy on stupid things when, you know, you need to channel your energy on building value for the company, right? And politics and BS like that doesn't really help the company grow. And so, you know, I got tested in a lot of my principles during the acquisition process because the acquiring company wanted to basically wanted me to screw over my employees and say, you know what, you can't give them what you promised them, which is a real test of my own morality. And I remember sitting across from the CEO. He said, "No, I'm not going to accelerate your guys like you want to, because, you know, you could have these clauses for your employees with their equity to accelerate." And I looked at him. I'm sitting there in Silicon Valley, and I said, "You know what? Deal's off. Can't do that to my team." And I probably said the F word more times than I have ever had in my life on that drive to the airport to SFO, and then the trip back to DC. But you know, I got a voicemail and said, "Okay, fine. You know, we'll agree to the acceleration." And so that was a low moment for me, only because I felt like I had just put everything at risk and just walked away, because they, you know, at that point I'm deep in legal bills, and I'm already figuring out what the capital burn was already just in the process that we're in. And I was already trying to figure out where do we go from here. But, you know, a low moment turned into a high moment pretty quickly. And I will say that I was a rookie, right? I mean, it was my first time negotiating a deal myself. I was a sole founder, so I didn't have another person to lean on to really help me. And so that was a big learning experience for me. And so I've learned going through that process what to do and what not to do. And like Sean said, I could probably spend hours upon hours of all the mistakes I've made. That's just one that is an emotional scar that probably took a couple years off my life, but, you know, I'm still here for now.
Paul, did you use a banker or did you represent your company yourself?
Yeah, it was an inbound. I was actually raising at the time and had term sheets from several VCs, and a strategic came in, and it was actually good leverage, because I said, you came to me, I didn't come to you. Which was a good part of the conversation. But at the same time, they know as the clock ticks with a bunch of your legal fees and your lawyers,
Yep.
$100,000 becomes $200,000 pretty quickly when lawyers are charging you $1,000 an hour for their IP lawyers to go through everything.
Yep. Interesting.
Thanks, guys. Paul, I want to ask a specific question to you. You obviously sold Invotas. You mentioned you sold Invotas to FireEye. I'm wondering if you can talk about what it's like to sell the company, like you start from the ground up. You know, what's that experience like? Maybe talk about having to let go and then, you know, rejoining maybe the big corporate world again.
So I'm going to make a lot of references here. So our acquisition process was very interesting, because the CEO of FireEye wanted to have the deal done before their sales kickoff, their global sales kickoff. So if you're familiar with sales kickoffs, they fly in all their salespeople from around the world. There's a lot of drinking involved, and it happens to be in Vegas. Everyone loves to do it in Vegas. So it's a big just party. And the kickoff was Monday, and I'm on the phone, literally sitting in Dulles Airport for 6 hours, like negotiating the final terms. I sent my team ahead of me because we hadn't finally closed the deal, so we were on the last mile of that. Closed the deal at 8 p.m. I get on a plane to Vegas. I have to be on stage at 8 a.m. because they want to do a big unveil, right? But that week was probably the biggest euphoric week because one, like you get through the process and it's just like a Herculean effort with just all the emotions going through it. On top of like celebrating in Vegas, I mean, you can't go wrong with that. So the timing of selling the company, going to Vegas might have paid for too many bar tabs, but that whole week just with and my whole team was there. So celebrating with my team was probably the best thing to really look around the table and think about all the hard times that we went through together. And that's the best thing, right? The bonds and relationships and the test of your conviction for yourself and for the team is the culmination of all of that. And you sit around the table and you can breathe that sigh of relief that we've made it. And, and the one thing I always told the folks that work for me is, I want to see you become successful entrepreneurs yourself down the road. And I've seen a couple who have gone off and done their own. And that's like the family tree effect that I love to see, because I've seen that over the years with other folks. But that was probably the best moment and best week, I should say, because that was a pretty darn good week. After the acquisition, you go to corporate world and it's different, right? I went from a small company to company with 5,000 employees on a global scale, and I'm having to run a business, over in India where I have to be up at 9 o'clock on the East Coast, 9 p.m. on the East Coast trying to take calls. It's a tough transition. But the one thing that I took that job and I felt very liberated with was, in any prior corporate job, I was worried about titles and moving up the corporate ranks and playing the politics. It was very liberating to come in and just, I said to the CEO, I'm going to be me. Like, I'm going to tell you if it's ugly, it's going to be ugly. One time, we were actually, I've done this a couple times where, we had executive QBRs or quarterly business reviews. We'd sit in a big room, everyone's dressed in their suits. I walked in with a blue tracksuit. I said, we're going to be in here talking for 9 hours. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I'm just going to. So he's like, wow, he's an ex-Air Force guy too. So he about lost it. He looked at me, he goes, nice blue tracksuit. I'm like, thanks. I'm gonna be pretty comfortable for the next 9 hours. So, I got rid of a lot of the baggage being in a corporate role, and I think it actually allowed me to be more free and creative and aggressive in terms of what I would do in a corporate role than if I was previously before I exited. So it was a great experience. I stayed on for 3 years. I was supposed to be there for only 18 months, but I stayed on for 3 years because we were working on a pretty cool project to try to grow the business. And, ultimately I found a time where I said, that's enough. I need to go back to take some time with my family and then go start another one, which it's been about a year since I took my break. And now I'm ready to go, because especially trying to homeschool kids in this virtual environment and 5 of them going to school, I'm about to lose it. So I need a distraction.
Thanks, Paul. I'll ask Sean, how has your work changed during COVID? A topical question. Obviously, Paul has been Mr. Father over here, but I'm wondering how venture capital, the industry is changing, and entrepreneurship is changing. And, maybe beyond just, we're all virtual avatars now. Are there more fundamental ways things are changing in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is absolutely. So the way I think about, so certainly there's the remote work piece of it, and we've all got, well, a lot of us, I know Paul was just mentioning I do, so I don't have 6, I have 2, but I have 2 kids in school, and 2's plenty, so I can't imagine 6. But we, we've got that going on. But on a professional level, the way I think about it is that in general, COVID has been this accelerant where there's things we talked about happening way over the horizon that are getting pulled in much closer, right? And maybe we'll start with education. So certainly in the K-12 environment, like as soon as it's safe for my 2nd and 3rd grader to go back to a classroom, they will be going back to a classroom. Like that sounds magical to me at this point. But when you start thinking about, you know, college and graduate school, right? It's going to be really interesting to see what higher ed looks like next fall. And I think a lot of things that we talked about happening, you know, 5-10 years from now in higher ed may happen next fall. Nick Ryan's in a program right now where we have our MBA students come to class in person one weekend every 7 weeks, and then we do the rest of it asynchronously. I think this is not me speaking as a Tepper employee, this is just me speaking as a VC. I suspect that, you know, a large percentage of MBAs will be received that way in the future, because you still get the MBA experience, which I think means drinking, by the way, on Friday night, right? They come in Friday, they do their exams. We don't give them any work Friday night, so, you know, they can go have their MBA experience on Friday night still get that networking. But the content's being consumed in a way where they can keep their career for those 2 years too. And COVID has been this great accelerant. We have way more students this year in our online hybrid MBA than we've had historically. Think about grocery delivery, right? For a long time, people said to me, like, man, you're crazy. You have someone drop your groceries on your front porch every week. I mean, I think you're crazy not to do that, right? But now the same guys that I would have that conversation with in the cul-de-sac on Friday night, where they would think how crazy it was that, you know, Instacart was dropping groceries off that day, all of us are getting groceries delivered over Instacart. Think about healthcare, right? You know, we had a lot of healthcare companies that work with us in the corporate startup lab at Carnegie Mellon, Optum, United Healthcare, UPMC Enterprises, right? Names that you guys would know. When those executives would come through our office, come through our lab, right? They would talk about telehealth as this thing like that was over the horizon. You know, there's a little bit of it going on right now with teledoc, but like someday this is going to be big. Well, certainly what we've learned over the last 6 months is that someday is today, right? The teledelivery of medicine is not a future thing now, it's becoming a current thing. And you can see this when you look at these kind of digital transformation based businesses today, right? Where they're accelerating in terms of their earnings, in terms of their performance over the last 6 months, while many other legacy companies are really struggling. So to me, I think beyond all the social and work changes, the other thing you're seeing is just a lot of these trends being shortened and accelerated as we experience things that felt like they were far into the future, you know, right now or in a much closer in time horizon there.
Thank you. Paul, if you want to add anything to that.
No, Sean's definitely got way more expertise on that than me.
Awesome. Well, I did want to cut out about 15 or 20 minutes for the audience to ask questions, and we've had a couple come over the chat. I think what I'll do is just call on those who posted the question, and feel free to unmute yourself, maybe introduce yourself, and then, you know, ask away. So the first question comes from Devin. Devin, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I just introduced myself before the call, but I'll do it one more time. CS 02, ECE 03, and I've been in the cybersecurity realm for the last, I guess, 18 years now. So it's been a fun trip. So I actually have two questions. Nick asked me to ask both of them. So Paul, first question is for you. You talked about the 100 conversations you've had with potential customers, and I was wondering if you could speak about you know, how did you make these connections to these 100 potential customers, and how did you convince them to talk to you? And then Sean, my next question is for you. So you talked about, you know, the biggest mistake that people make is like asking for money when they don't need it. But when, you know, from your perspective as in the venture firm, what is the biggest mistake that people make when they come to you? Not, you know, aside from having other options to raise the money.
Yeah, so mine, similar to yours actually, amassed over many, many years. And my very first job was at a company called AtStake, which was made up of a bunch of old school hackers. And it's funny to watch this group that it was a startup that we sold to Symantec back in 2004. It's a small community. I mean, you know this in cybersecurity, it's a small community. And the one thing that I learned very early on from my very first manager was he had a massive Rolodex of just people, and I was just amazed in terms of all the people he knew. So I learned early on that relationships are key. And some people treat relationships like they're, something that's easily kind of made and then put to the side. But, I invested in a lot of these relationships. I call people, I became friends with a lot of them. And, over the years, I just amassed a massive network. And then when I took over, and this is where I would say the role as running the global product business for FireEye was, I got exposed to, hundreds upon hundreds of customers, because running the product business, I was the guy that had to come in and make the promises of fixing all the crap that their customers were pissed off about. So I got to know a lot of people along the way. And if they call it, what, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's like, 1 or 2 degrees in this community to get to any given person. And, I've been very fortunate alongside my co-founder. We do a lot of diligence as well for some of the venture capital firms. So we continue to build our Rolodex, and that's the one advice I would give to anyone, right? It's relationships are king. You can't just meet someone and say, great, I know someone. No, you've got to invest in those relationships and cultivate them. And, you're going to have to do favors for other people. You never know when, things are going to come back around, and it could be 4 years later. It could be 6 years later. You never know. But I think anyone who's ever met me knows that I'm a pretty genuine person in building those relationships. And that's I think that's really helped me along my way in my career. Is that's actually how we got acquired. Was I just happened to know the president of FireEye, and he's like, hey, we're looking at acquiring something. He called me up and said, would you guys be interested in potentially exiting? I mean, local DC guy, right? It was Mandiant. It was I don't know if you're familiar with Mandiant. Mandiant. I knew Kevin Mandia and Travis Reese very well, and I got lucky.
I used to work for them. I know them both. Yeah.
Yeah. So Travis was the one that called me and said, hey, we want to buy your company. I met him a couple years back, didn't know him all that well, but we got to know each other, and fate happened, and there you go. Things kind of fell into place. So I believe in relationships, creating your own luck, right? And those opportunities.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. So just one other thing I'd say on that is, if you're hearing that and you're thinking like, oh man, I wish I had the Rolodex Paul does, and I don't, and I still want to be an entrepreneur. There are, interesting tools starting to develop around helping these people find these first customer conversations. The most interesting one that just came out is from First Round Capital, which is a pretty well-known early stage venture group. They were the first money in Uber, for example. So they've done pretty well on that and a number of other deals. But they just launched a product called Discovery Assist, which basically helps entrepreneurs who don't have a network like Paul get their first 15 conversations with potential customers, which is pretty cool. So it's discoveryassist.firstround.com. In terms of the biggest mistakes venture people make when they pitch venture firms, I think it's probably one of two things. One would be not having a thought out plan in terms of how you're going to use your money that you're asking me to invest in your business to grow your business and make your business worth a lot more when you're done. I mean, before you raise your next round of funding, the reality is, like, once you get on the sort of treadmill of raising money, with very few exceptions, you're going to kind of perpetually be raising money until you get profitable or ultimately sell like Paul did, or whatever the case may be. And so you want to make sure each round that you're raising creates enough value that you can raise the next round of capital at a much higher valuation. And if you're not doing that, right, then it's kind of foolish for me to invest in you now. I'll just wait till later. But you would be shocked the number of entrepreneurs who haven't actually thought through how the money and the plan that they're putting in place actually grows enterprise value in a way to actually make your next round more valuable. The other mistake that would probably be tied for that is not having thought through enough why this business will ultimately be valuable. It's not that you're going to know all the answers when you're just starting out, but you should have some sense on, like, if I'm successful, this is why this business becomes a really valuable business. Because the trade that a VC is looking for is the terrible trade that I mentioned the last time I was talking about venture, right? It's give a little bit of money to own a little bit of the business that's going to be worth a lot more at some point in the future. And so answering questions like, if this is successful, how big could it be, you know, what makes this hard for other people to replicate your success? I mean, there's different answers depending on the business, and I don't want to, you know, belabor the point with only a few minutes left here of the Q&A, but I think you want to have at least thought through those types of issues on the front end. Max?
Thanks, all. A brief piggyback off the first question related to the Rolodex and meeting people and making connections. I do want to just make a shameless plug that part of my mission statement for this group is that it is a platform where you can make connections that you otherwise wouldn't have made, or, you know, meet new people or learn about new companies. So I hope this is also an avenue to build your Rolodex and meet new people. But without further ado, I want to move on to Ivy. Asked a question. Ivy, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, just now I mentioned what I did. I'm a second-year MBA in Tepper. So before MBA, I worked in China for 6 years. My last job was I worked in a corporate VC in the electronic industry in China. Yes. So my question is, I wonder, like, what would be the process to find the important problem to solve? So did you start from the technology, or did you talk to people and find inspiration, or do you have a more systematic approach to find the important problems?
Thanks, Abby. The question is, how did you find the problems to solve? Paul, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, my most recent one was kind of an interesting one. I have a friend who I worked with him, 18, 20 years ago, and he now runs security over at Netflix, and they build a lot of stuff at Netflix. They don't tend to buy a lot of products. So I just said, hey, what are you guys building in-house, and what's your biggest problem, and tapping into that. And so, for me, it was starting at one end of a very extreme maturity curve of a customer who is, I was looking at cloud security because I'd learned from my previous role running the product businesses. That's kind of the next emerging area. Started with, just people I knew, and just said, hey, well, what's your biggest problem? And they're saying, this particular area is one that we're dealing with. We've built this, this, and this. And I started to go downstream in terms of less mature customers, just to see if that was a pain point that was prevalent across different areas. And quite frankly, I ended up in the opposite end of the spectrum, where they hadn't even gone to cloud yet. So they weren't even beginning the conversation around where we were, because we had a thesis that we wanted to be about 2 or 3 years from where the current cloud security market is, and go from there. And so we had an idea where that was. So we had to continue to have different conversations with customers and really dial in, like, where is the sweet spot? Because it probably took about 20, 30 conversations before we started to see a pattern emerge. You can't go off of like 1 or 2, because if you go off of 1 or 2, that's not going to be enough. I mean, I need enough of a population set to be comfortable, especially when I'm spending my own money, right? And Sean mentioned that trade-off of taking venture money or your own. And so, I have a certain threshold in terms of how much capital I'm willing to put at risk to be able to take on this next venture. And, luckily it is, and I would even say in the first 20, 30 conversations, my co-founder and I about a month ago were going, man, are we like completely off base here? What's wrong? Is this like not the right thing? Like we thought it was. We've been in security forever. I mean, we know this space. We talk to CISOs like all the time in our previous jobs, and because the formula that we were used to before wasn't the same formula that was going to be applicable in this new market. So we had to retune that, the same fundamental methodology, but just had to recalibrate what we were looking for. So, the one thing I say is, when I was in a corporate environment at FireEye, I probably spent more time focused on like the internal BS and politics, and really not understanding like the macro level problems of what's going on out there and problems that you could solve, versus like the problems that I was trying to solve being inside of a company, saying, oh, I got customer A yelling at me, I got customer X yelling at me, I got customer B yelling at me, and I don't really understand what the pattern is, right? I'm reacting to a lot of things, and I'm dealing with a lot of distractions. So you have to be able to extract yourself above that level and look at the macro level and say, okay, what's really going on in this market, versus like what's in front of me or what's around me that I'm dealing with that given, because it's easy to get wrapped up in corporate politics and things like that, because that's like the route that you're in, the current path that you're on. So if you're in a current job looking for a problem to solve, I think you have to kind of broaden your thinking outside of what you're currently dealing with, and start to look for that signal in a lot of noise. I mean, especially in hot industries, there's a ton of noise. And we would sit there and look at a competitive analysis and say, oh, well, this person says they did something on their website, so they're competing with us. Until you go in and talk to customers that they may have, and you're like, okay, are you really using this product, or are you just like saying this to be up on a promotional level and really understand their usage? And I would say like 9 times out of 10, it's probably some BS customer that they're making up, that they're not really using the product and not really extracting value. So that's a part of the analysis they have to go through, is the market of what the customers want, the competitors that are out there, and the truth of really like, are the competitors in these customers, are they really delivering value or not, right? That's the formula that we're currently in right now. Is we know I think we have a thesis of where we want to go. We have a problem statement. We have a prototype that we've built, and we're testing that prototype now with several customers and getting feedback on that. So we're in that prototype into starting to build from a product standpoint and productization.
Thanks, Paul. There's one, Sean, I'll let you take a crack at that. And then we have one last question from Andrew after that. I hope we have enough time for.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't have a lot to add to that. I would just say, I think customers are really good at telling you the problems they have, but entrepreneurs are really good at coming up with the solutions to those problems, right? And I think what you heard Paul talking about was sort of this match of hearing the problems and then coming up with the right solutions against it.
Thank you. We have one final question. It comes from Andrew. Andrew, do you want to take it away?
Yes, happy to. And of course, wanted to say thank you so much for organizing this event and connecting us. This is my first time and I've already learned a lot, so I really appreciate it. Little bit of background, CS03. I spent 15 years at UBS in corporate development and technology roles. And then I've spent the last 3 years co-founding companies and selling them in the COO #2 capacity. I'm just wrapping up the handover to the purchaser as we speak, and this has me thinking a lot about what to do next. So really, I'd welcome thoughts or experience that you're able to share. Like, did you go consult? Did you advise? Did you just take a break? And if you did, how did you know when it was time to get back in? Just pause there.
Yeah, it's probably better for Paul on that one. So.
Yeah. So I guess, like I said, I took some time off when I stopped working for the acquiring company, but the part that I really enjoyed after the acquisition, and I did have some time not going through the flywheel of a startup, a corporate job, was the satisfaction I got was working with other entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs in the area, and passing on. And Sean mentioned it too. I mean, we could go on and on about mistakes, and I feel like I have to pay it forward to other entrepreneurs to avoid things that I made, right? I made mistakes a lot of times with VCs as a first-time fundraiser. I didn't know what the heck I was supposed to share, or how much or how little, or how much should I tell? Because when I was so excited, I was like this little puppy and excited to tell my story, and I'd go tell everyone, and boy, was that a mistake, right? So I think spending time with a lot of first-time entrepreneurs is something I find satisfying, because I want to pay it forward, make sure that they avoid those mistakes. I do angel investing as well with some cohorts, and so I feel like it's my duty to work with other entrepreneurs to help them be successful in their journey, because it's very satisfying, right? And I want other people to feel that type of moment that I felt, and I think it's probably the best way for me to spend my time is to do that. And of course, now that I'm starting another one, it's nice to be back in after a break, right? I needed a little bit of time to decompress from the stress of acquisitions and dealing with lawyers and corp dev people and big corporate world. I need to take a step back. But what has been consistent is working with first-time entrepreneurs across the board.
Awesome. So we're at 7:02, and I only booked Paul and Sean Ammirati's time for an hour. So I think we're going to wrap up the fireside chat portion. But from all of us, I want to say thank you, specifically Sean and Paul, for your time. This has been super great for me. It's obviously been the first session we've done. So hopefully it gives everyone out there a sense of just the caliber of speaker and people that we want to present. So I think I'll speak for everyone when I just say thank you guys so much for your time.
I had to jump, but I just wanted to thank you for organizing this, Max. I really appreciate what you're doing here with the community.
Definitely.
So thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later.